Ladies and gentlemen, let me start first by thanking Khalid Ramazeh and the World Anti-Extremism Network for the kind invitation to address you here at the Toronto Democracy Forum. I'm very proud to say that Khalid is a senior fellow at my institute and the kind of courageous intellectual that Canada needs a lot more of. He's willing to put himself on the line to defend values and a way of life that can potentially put him in harm's way, and I'm honored to have him as part of my institute. Interference in our society by foreign actors, both states, such as Russia and China and Iran, and non-states, especially radical Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood, is quite properly becoming a hot topic in Canada. Yet while it is indeed a matter of enormous importance, its real significance can only be understood in the context of the new Cold War against the West. And let me open a brief historical parenthesis and remind everyone that Cold War Mark I, the one that is over, the one that ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall, between the USSR and the West, started in Ottawa. It started in Ottawa, right here in Canada. In September 1945, a whistleblower at the Russian embassy, Igor Guzenko, stole documents detailing Soviet espionage against the West. And when the extent of Soviet perfidy was revealed, Canada enthusiastically joined other Western democracies in creating the post-war collective security architecture, including NATO. But here's the important thing to remember about the story about Igor Guzenko. Guzenko wandered Ottawa for a day, desperately trying to get anyone to take an interest in his tale of betrayal and duplicity. Why would those nice Russians, our allies in the Second World War, led by that dynamic Uncle Joe Stalin, want to harm us nice, inoffensive Canadians? The answer, then as now, is that power-hungry despots despise our way of life. Please remember, as I lay out the challenges of Cold War Mark II, the cautionary tale of poor Igor Guzenko forlornly wandering the streets of Ottawa, trying desperately to get the authorities to take an interest in what seemed to them a fantastic an unbelievable tale of duplicity and betrayal. And yet Guzenko was right, and we Canadians, thinking we were safe, far from troubles in distant lands of which we knew nothing, we were wrong. Cold War Mark II, then, is one in which Russia and China have long been engaged, while here at home, our bien-pensant elites have continuously warned us against adopting a supposedly outdated Cold War mentality. The only ones who are out of date, however, are those whose understanding of recent history ends with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the beginning of the so-called end of history, in which the values of liberal democracy in the West reign undisputed forever and ever. Amen. Problem is, history never stops. Nor does the competition between states with diverging interests. The tentacles of Cold War Mark II, between an aggressively imperialist China and a revanchist Russia, and a naive and credulous West, reach deeply into Canadian society, endangering our citizens, our economy, and our interests. Russia's bloody invasion of Ukraine, like China's kidnapping of 2 Canadian citizens, every Canadian will know this story, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, and its suborning of the very machinery of our democracy has shone a bright light on this conflict. Less visible to many Canadians has been the rise of radical Islam in Canada, mostly under the aegis of the Muslim Brotherhood and its various front organizations. And for this reason, I'm going to divide my remarks today into a section on Russia and China, followed by one looking at radical Islam. And I'll wrap it up with some specific suggestions for action, as Khalid asked me to do. Throughout, my intention is to concentrate the minds of Canadians and the friends of Canada who are in this room, to concentrate our minds on the scale of the attack on our institutions and freedoms and how to defeat that attack. Authoritarians learned long ago that people in the West will generally resist bald military threats to our domestic freedoms and democracy. The world's bullies have therefore now understandably shifted to working tirelessly to weaken the West's moral resolve, to weaken our moral resolve. Misinformation and disinformation about us delivered to our television, to our social media feeds, and inboxes by armies of internet trolls are thus today's front line in the struggle to defend freedom and democracy. Authoritarians use the social media megaphone to repeat that the West and democracy are vicious, are corrupt, are indefensible. Our adversaries stoke conflict within our societies and sap our will to defend our values and our way of life. If our societies are nothing but vile repositories for all that is worst about human society, racism, sexism, white supremacy, homophobia, societies built on the legacy of slavery and colonial exploitation, then our adversaries hope that we will conclude that we are not worth defending. Our adversaries understand that our Western undeniable military superiority over the world's authoritarians is meaningless if we lack the political resolve to use it. If we think that there is no moral difference between free democracies and authoritarian despotisms, and therefore no reason to defend the former from the latter. And that is why China and Russia and radical Islam take aim at our culture, our beliefs, our institutions, our history. Their object is nothing less than to cause us to lose faith in ourselves and in the society that we have built. In Canada's case, we have aided and abetted our adversaries' ambitions by allowing them to launder and invest money on an industrial scale. We have, moreover, been complacent in the face of foreign efforts to coerce and intimidate Canadian citizens and residents, seeking to alert Canadians to the dangers posed by China, Russia, the Muslim Brotherhood, and other authoritarian regimes and non-state movements. As I've already suggested, foreign interference in Canada is persistent and systemic. It doesn't just happen occasionally. It is a constant present dogging our progress as a society. It doesn't just target elections. It exploits small flaws in the legacies of our towering historical figures like Sir John A. Macdonald, Winston Churchill, Egerton Ryerson, and divisive issues such as residential schools and pipelines, and seeks to erode trust in institutions. And that requires a whole of democracy, whole of society response with real consequences for the perpetrators of these actions. And I'll talk about that more at the end. How do our adversaries go about this? Authoritarians increasingly blend disinformation, covert influence, and transnational oppression into one playbook that undermines sovereignty and frightens members of Canada's diaspora societies from denouncing what they see and from participating fully in our democratic life. Just think, and again, this is a story that will be familiar to Canadians, just think about the threats made against the prominent Conservative Member of Parliament, Michael Chong. His family was threatened by China, and Mr. Chong has resources and protections not available to ordinary Canadians. The Chinese are known to exercise strict oversight and control over both temporary residents, such as students from the PRC, and naturalized Canadians with family and other ties back in China. Russia has a much less developed diaspora community to work with in Canada, but has plenty of other tools. Networked propaganda in which multiple channels ranging from Russia Today right down to bots on social media repeat blatant falsehoods to such an extent that they acquire the appearance of truth, because everybody knows the lies that they promote, because everybody has seen them in one place or another. All of this is amplified by artificial intelligence and techniques that make it appear that content actually generated in Russia is created and endorsed by many people right here in Canada. There's no paranoia on my part, by the way. In September 2024, for example, in the FBI's doppelganger affidavit, you can see described Russian efforts to monitor Western information and political environments and exploit sensitive and polarizing issues using disinformation, deep fakes, and an army of more than 3,000 influencers, including in Canada, to intensify divisions, including on issues such as natural resource development, in particular oil and gas development and pipelines that may directly affect Russia's interests as a major supplier of oil and gas. China engages in exactly this kind of information warfare as well, through state-controlled social media platforms and through friendly Canadian domestic media platforms, including diaspora media that are difficult for Canadian authorities to understand and follow systematically. Much more than the institutions of our democracy in Canada, by the way, are under siege, of course. The fact is that China's interference and espionage activities are hiding in plain sight in many of our other institutions. There's been no public accounting, for example, of the events at Canada's Infectious Diseases Laboratory in Winnipeg, where now sacked Chinese scientists appear to have been sharing research secrets with Chinese authorities. They simply fled the country, and no light has been shone on the events. We don't know exactly what happened. As for our universities, the Globe and Mail, one of our national newspapers, has reported that one of our universities has formally warned researchers at that university that they are not required to talk to our national security investigators from our National Security Agency, CSIS, not to talk to our CSIS investigators about their collaborations with China, as if the premier organization charged by Parliament with safeguarding the interests of Canadians against foreign corruption were somehow an unwelcome and illegitimate interloper. China has enjoyed enormous success in transferring research data from Canadian universities in strategically sensitive areas that serve PRC interests, and according to the former director of CSIS, and an MLI senior fellow at my institute, Dick Fadden, these areas include avionics, space technology, nuclear science, and high-level optics research. Meantime, large numbers of students from the PRC, most approved and sponsored by the state, and paying hefty foreign tuition fees, have become a major revenue source for Canadian universities. Add to this the many Chinese researchers and graduate students shut out of the United States for security reasons at Canadian universities, which have open and close research ties with both their American counterparts and research institutions in China. All of this makes our universities yet another set of Canadian institutions vulnerable to Chinese pressure and manipulation. A different Canadian group that deserves to be called out in this sad litany of leadership failures is Canada's business elite. The late David Kilgour, who at one point in his political career was the Minister of State for Asia Pacific, told me that when he was appointed to that ministerial role, his first visit was from a representative of the Prime Minister's office who wanted to make sure that Mr. Kilgour, the Minister of State for Asia Pacific, would not get any ideas above his ministerial station. Our policy towards China, he was told in no uncertain terms, is not set at the Foreign Ministry, not set in the Prime Minister's office, but at the headquarters of Power Corporation in Montreal. Power Corporation is perhaps the leading Canadian corporate investor in China. I attended a talk by one of the Desmarais family, owners of Power Corporation, a few years ago, and this executive hectored the audience that he didn't understand the hostility that China somehow and sometimes evoked in the minds of Canadians. He condescendingly assured us that if only we understood China as he did, we would see that there was absolutely nothing to fear. Unless you think that this is simply the liberal, large L liberal Laurentian elite talking, rest assured that my experience was no different. Among Western Canada's energy leadership, I was persona non grata for several years after my institute argued against the Chinese National Overseas Oil Corporation's bid to acquire Alberta energy firm Nexen. National security considerations, I was told, were to take a back seat to Nexen and any later oil patch sales because we needed to fetch top dollar from Chinese state-controlled buyers. Now, this doesn't just affect Canada. This doesn't just affect Canada. It also affects our relationship with the United States. Canada is one of America's closest allies, a member of NATO, a member of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance. If any significant part of the leaked intelligence briefings on China's Canadian presence turn out to be true, Ottawa's reaction reveals a country that cannot protect its own interests and cannot protect the interests of its allies. And this tale of corruption and elite capture has far-reaching consequences. For example, our Five Eyes intelligence sharing allies quietly wonder if it is safe to share sensitive information with Canada. So, right now, Canada is openly courting China as a trade partner and a potential replacement for the central economic relationship that Canada has enjoyed with the United States for over a century. So Ottawa's complacence as regards the rot in our institutions endangers not only Canadians, but the solidity of our most important relationship between Canada and the United States. As I promised, I'd like to shift now to talk about the threat to Canada posed by radical Islam, and especially the Muslim Brotherhood and its representatives. Let me start by saying that Islamist and Muslim Brotherhood entryism into Canadian politics and institutions is no recent phenomenon. It has been underway long before the October 7th attacks in Israel, and the follow-on explosion of carefully organized and choreographed university encampments and anti-Semitic activities such as barricading Jewish neighborhoods, intimidating Jewish students and profs on campus, boycotting Jewish businesses, physical attacks on Jewish schools and places of worship. The day of October 7th merely stripped away the pretense, exposing that Islamism and terror financing are no longer distant and imported threats, but are now homegrown ones. And these dangers are now visible across the country. Multiple Muslim organizations have come under the Canada Revenue Agency, our version of the IRS for our American friends, for their alleged links to terror financing and the Muslim Brotherhood. In Windsor, a Shia mosque openly eulogized slain Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah for the second year running. In Quebec, 17 public schools were caught indoctrinating students with Islamist teachings, and Tamara Gottlieb has been doing amazing work documenting the penetration by Islamists and their ilk of Ontario's public schools. At Toronto Metropolitan University, just down the road from here, a publicly funded research paper claimed that Hamas, Hezbollah, and ISIS are wrongly designated as terrorist organizations in Canada due to systemic Islamophobia and racism. As we know, the government in Ottawa cannot bring itself to use the term anti-Semitism without prefacing it with Islamophobia, despite the fact that the absolute number of hate crime incidents and the fastest growing kind of hate crime is anti-Semitism. Our then foreign minister a year ago explained Ottawa's abandonment of our traditional pro-Israel policy by referring to the demographics of her riding. And a former senior cabinet minister in a major provincial government resigned and did not run in the last election because she could not accept the degree to which crass electoral appeals to Muslim voters were causing the government to lose focus on the rule of law and the safety and security of the Jewish community. Similarly, a Jewish member of cabinet in British Columbia was driven from office over these very same issues. In all cases, Islamist forces are clearly using the same kinds of communications techniques to magnify domestic political disagreements and to make it appear that Islamist political themes have widespread support in Canada. And these examples reveal just how effectively the Muslim Brotherhood-aligned groups and other Islamist networks have infiltrated and subverted Canadian institutions to advance their global caliphate ambitions. And their sabotage strategy is quite straightforward. Use democracy to destroy democracy. They have also turned Canada into a convenient hub for transnational criminal operations, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and terror financing, used to fuel instability in the Middle East and beyond. The Muslim Brotherhood's success in Canada is no accident. We have a permissive environment for exactly this kind of activity, shaped by vote bank politics and essentially unchecked immigration with little in the way of security controls. It has made Canada an ideal incubator for Islamist expansion. Canada has become ground zero for their soft power operations, from campaigns to criminalize Islamophobia to the indoctrination of school children under the banner of anti-Palestinian racism. And with the help of their progressive allies, Islamist activists have weaponized accusations of Islamophobia to silence critics, intimidate journalists, and destroy professional reputations. They've even succeeded in discouraging federal scrutiny of their operations and finances by threatening political retaliation and claims of Islamophobia and racism. And this civilizational jihad, central to the Muslim Brotherhood's long-term strategy, doesn't rely on bullets or bombs, but on ballots and bureaucracy. It isn't fought in the mountains of Afghanistan or in the deserts of Arabia, but within our cities, our schools, and our democratic institutions. Its advocates aren't scruffy militants, but polished, charming, media-savvy figures, articulate, liberal-sounding sympathizers, the names of whom you can easily guess, especially if you voted in the last New York election. This nonviolent jihad manifests in lobbying efforts to criminalize Islamophobia and campaigns pushing anti-Palestinian racism and Islamic doctrination in schools, in conducting lawfare to silence critics, and in leveraging a powerful Muslim voting bloc to influence policy and evade scrutiny. It has succeeded extravagantly in putting about an account of the conflict in Gaza that completely obscures the fact that the real issue is not the absence of a Palestinian state, but the presence of a Jewish state imbued with and energetically defending Western values in the heart of a Middle East that Islam regards as its own. It is that affront which Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, and others seek to erase. That is precisely why the West must regard Israel as the tip of the spear in a long civilizational struggle between the West and radical Islam. What the Muslim Brotherhood and its proxies are doing to Israel is a dress rehearsal for their plans for the West, plans we are blithely ignoring, or worse, are convincing ourselves don't really exist, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Now let me tell you my recommendations for dealing with this. Job one of any government is to defend its citizens from foreign threats, a task at which Ottawa is failing miserably. So what do? Here is my short-ish list. I think I have 20 recommendations. First of all, abandon the farcical idea that Canada's long-term interests lie anywhere save in the Western Alliance, in supporting Israel in its struggle against radical Islam, and in our precious bilateral relationship with the United States. The idea that we would, for example, entrust our security, freedom, and prosperity to a country like China that has consistently shown itself willing to use any degree of trade or other dependence as a weapon against its partners, that has consistently plundered Canadian intellectual property whenever it had the chance, that has kidnapped, threatened, and intimidated our citizens whenever it was convenient to them, is madness. We have to look past the offensive comments of the current occupant of the White House about Canada and think more deeply about how to manage that relationship. And that's a topic to which perhaps we can return during the coffee break. Second, we have to create a foreign agents registry with real teeth. Politicians or civil servants with even the slightest role in shaping Canada's foreign, industrial, or defense policy should be prohibited, including after they leave the public sector for retirement, from receiving payments or gifts for supporting foreign nations' agendas in Canada. We should beef up the capacity of our intelligence services to disrupt, deter, and prevent influence operations and transnational repression targeting Canadians. We should coordinate deterrence and prevention measures with democratic allies, including the naming and shaming of Canadians who enable and collaborate with foreign authoritarian regimes. We should adopt a unified tactical framework for countering and preventing transnational oppression, moving beyond reactive casework to disruption, protection, and deterrence along the lines suggested by the Atlantic Council. We should build a global alliance against transnational repression, perhaps a project for the World Anti-Extremism Network, to coordinate actions, share intelligence, harmonize consequences across democracies. We should stand up clear consequences for foreign actors, targeted Magnitsky-style sanctions, visa bans, asset measures, and procurement partnership restrictions for collaborators, including allied sanctions against Canadian collaborators. We should create rapid response capacities, a national hotline for transnational repression victims, expedited protection measures, dedicated prosecutorial and policing guidance. We have to strengthen anti-money laundering laws and enforcement, with a particular focus on radical Islam, but also covering organized crime, which is linked to China's nefarious activities both here and abroad. We have to return to an immigration policy based on the demonstrable interests of Canada and its survival as a successful member of the Western Alliance of Liberal Democracies. And that means, amongst other things, no longer allowing virtually uncontrolled immigration of single military-aged men from Muslim countries and the rapid deportation of new arrivals who demonstrate by their actions and their words that they have come not to be assimilated into Canadian society, but to transform that society into one dominated by the People's Republic of China or by radical Islamists. We have to double down on our alliances, such as the Five Eyes, NORAD, and NATO, and build new ones in the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East, and elsewhere of like-minded liberal democratic countries seeking to deter foreign interference, transnational repression, and the spread of radical Islam. We have to treat our vital security and economic partnership with the United States as a cornerstone of our safety and prosperity today and in the long term, and have the fortitude and foresight to think of its significance in the long term and not be pushed into disastrous strategic miscalculations for the momentary pleasure of annoying Donald Trump. It is cutting off our nose to spite our face. We have to assure that legitimate free trade is not used as a cover for the deindustrialization of our economy and the transfer of thousands of jobs to China. Free trade is incompatible with national governments directing their countries' companies to act as instruments of foreign and security policy, which is the case in China. It is entirely possible to be both hard-headed free traders and staunch defenders of Canada's national interests. Finally, a couple of points specifically aimed at the danger represented by radical Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood. We have to abandon our farcical policy of allowing diaspora electoral politics to determine our policy in the Middle East and our immigration policy at home. With respect to the Muslim Brotherhood, since their ultimate goal is to subvert and replace democratic systems with Sharia-based governance, Canada's sedition and anti-terrorism laws must be reviewed and modernized to address this ideological threat. The CRA and federal security bodies should be granted full autonomy to investigate organizations with opaque finances or extremist ties and without political interference. Entities and individuals found in violation of anti-terrorism or anti-money laundering laws must be permanently blacklisted and charged, preventing them from re-emerging under new names or charitable fronts. And finally, Ottawa should dismantle performative positions like the Special Representative on Combating Islamophobia, which serve only to deepen national divisions and empower the very networks undermining Canadian democracy. This is a very ambitious agenda, ladies and gentlemen. But the threats posed by our adversaries, the safety of Canadians, and the integrity of our institutions and way of life require nothing less. And to conclude, I cannot help but say, if you ask, what do I hope for Canada? Milton, who is quoted here along the wall from the Areopagitica, said, "Methinks I see in my mind a noble and puissant nation, rousing herself like a strong man after a sleep, and shaking her invincible locks." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I hope, and I hope you hope, for Canada. Thank you.